okay, not to stretch too far to try to connect Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle, and the Hound of the Baskervilles to the subject of the day, but in reading this book, did you ever have the thought, have human beings really improved as people since the time of this book was written? Like I was reading the section where Watson is interrogating this Laura Lyons character, right? There's this very beautiful woman who it's one of the many red herrings in the book, that she turns out to be a person who sent Sir Charles Baskerville a letter asking him to meet her outside the gate and at 10 p.m. because she needs help to get out of her marriage, basically. And there's a moment where Watson is very suspicious of her and doesn't like her answers and says, well, why did you have to meet him outside? Because he thinks that she's lured him outside to be murdered. And she says back to him, do you think that a woman could go alone at that hour to a bachelor's house? And for the next couple of pages, it kind of departs from normal Holmesian dialogue to get into this whole Victorian morality situation where he's weighing the veracity of her answers versus the social pressures that she must be dealing with to try to continue to seem proper. It just occurred to me that people of our era, we just don't worry about seeming moral to the world anymore in the way this book presents
Matt,
people.
that is so true, and it is so thoroughly true of this story and the behavior of the characters. Even the butler, who is kind of drawn into this story, is constantly protesting his honor and trying to make sure he doesn't implicate anyone. And we find out he's holding back information in various ways in order to not injure people. I mean, the amount of thoughtfulness that people had about their own reputation, about the potential for damaging others, and so on, is like amazing. They're playing by a set of rules that barely even exists anymore.
We talked about this when we talked about the shot by Alexander Pushkin, and part of you wants to make fun of the young men of that era who challenge each other to mortal combat over insults to their honor or to a lady's honor or something like that. But when we look back in that era, there actually was a little bit of a regulatory mechanism in place to keep people from acting like total jerks, right? And it's one of the things that I like about Holmes as a character is that he doesn't just solve a mystery. He almost always achieves something that feels like justice in his stories, right? Like it's not the people that he's defends or represents. It's not like some of the noir detective stories that in America where the client is often a cad too.
Right, right.
But
Or you find out you just unwittingly did a favor for the big corrupt layer of operators. And
right.
you go home, smoke a cigarette, and stare at the ceiling and go, man. As I said, James Elroy told me that the message of the moral of American noir is you're fucked. And the moral of Sherlock Holmes is not that. It's
Right.
that with enough rationality, enough patience, enough cunning and slyness, and so on, everything can be returned to its proper owner at the end.
And in this book, I guess we have to give away what happens at the end, right?
Sure.
So it turns out that the crime has been organized by a devious character named Stapleton, who is in fact a distant relative of the Baskervilles and stands to inherit if enough people are knocked off, and has contrived an elaborate scheme to
Scared to death, frightened to death, the current heir.
the current.
He's going through the list of people in front of him for the estate, and he's using a dog covered in fluorescent paint, basically, in phosphorus, to frighten them, because they all believe that there's this ancient curse that they will be stalked by a dog. So, in other words, it's in all the successors' subconsciouses and minds that there's this dog that might haunt them. This guy created a version of it, and he runs it at them. And, he's gotten down to just one left.
Right. And he uses a succession of ruses to try to draw people in. The stolen boot turns out to be a way to get the dog familiar with the victim's scent.
Right.
And it's one of the last things that you find in the book, is the discarded boot. We lose the killer in the end. Unusually in a Holmes story, we don't actually see him taken by the ruff of his neck and dragged away. He disappears in the moor. Right.
Okay. One of the features of this story that always bothered me. There's a big flaw in it for me, but it's a flaw that relates to the way a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories work out. Remember, this is the age of science. This is around 1900, and the series started before then. Victorian science is just, making great bounds. They're discovering all kinds of properties of electricity and so on.
Medicine, yeah.
In this story, though, it turns on a chemistry experiment. It turns on the use of this phosphorus to make a glow around this dog, to make it especially scary. And that's kind of cool and everything, but there's something about it that feels a little Deus Ex Machina, like from the outside. Like, would I really be fooled by a glowing dog? Would a educated Victorian gentleman seeing a glowing dog not go, "Hey, that thing has phosphorus all over it"? Like,
right.
In other words, were they not sufficiently advanced at that point? They weren't like medieval peasants, they didn't know about phosphorus and chemistry and things that can be made to glow. Like, really, would it have the effect that they claim it would?
Yeah, they could have done something a little bit different, right? Like it could have been the Loch Ness monster, and you could have made a fake submerged snake or something like that, and that would have been a little bit more believable.
And I also always believed that the dog should have killed the guy.
That's true too.
That ultimate justice would have been, he did something wrong.
That's a good point. I thought that too. Yeah. But it ultimately
killed its master. I mean.
Yeah, the master. That's the way it should have. Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of a suggestion that that's what happened.
Is there?
I think there's. It's not quite clear what happened to the master at the end. So, except that he's gone. Yeah.
But Holmes' stories do have a lot of chemistry and a lot of zoology.
Yeah.
A large portion of them turn on some scientific, principle, or they thought it was this, but it was a snake,
right,
or whatever. Right.
Or that he's discovered something because he's stayed up at night seeing what happens when you flick ashes on a corpse from 14 feet or whatever it is.
Right.
And that thing that property of Holmes is always very charming. But what I like about the way this book ends is that he preserves the kind of superstitious wonder of the Baskerville legend, right? Like he doesn't laugh at it. He doesn't make fun of people for believing in it.
Right.
Even though he himself never really bought it for a second. he he almost comes with a special kind of punitiveness for Stapleton for abusing,
The power of
the
this mythology and the supernatural and so on.
right, this old English story that's survived for generations. It's a very English thing. This Hound of the Baskervilles. It centers around this great manor and the succession of a great family and a fortune of 760,000 whatever. I mean, I remember
Pounds.
when they say that the number in the book, you can tell like that it was designed to give the Victorian reader an instant stiffy. But he in the end, um, he seems to have a special venom for the Stapleton character because he's almost like an inverted image of Holmes. He's a sort of scientist.
Right.
He's also like a thin, gangly character, but he's completely cynical in ways that Holmes isn't. And it's a battle of wits at the end that Holmes wins, and it's totally satisfying to me at the end.
And going back to your suggestion that there was an ethic and a social structure there that is kind of appealing in our anything goes age. The ultimate sin, I lived in England for a few years, and I like to always brag about it, and went to Oxford. And you know what the real ultimate social sin for the English gentleman is? Not to be generous with those who depend on him.
Mm-hmm.
And what is especially vile about this villain is that he's going to take over the lives of these villagers. Because remember, the estate is one which supports everybody. Its lands are where they live. They form its staff. You take care of the church. It's a feudal arrangement in which noblesse oblige. Because you're noble and because you have the 760,000 endowment, you must take care of the people around you. And the thing that's horrible about the thought of this guy, this selfish, psychopathic liar, getting the office of, head of the Baskerville lands and properties, is that he doesn't care about anybody else.
No.
And so the sense in which Holmes restores order is that he keeps in office, so to speak, the man who cares about the others beneath him, around him, and the future of the estate. It's really a blow against people who are greedy and don't fulfill their obligations. They're feudal, they're medieval, they're ancient obligations. And this comes back to the point you just made. Holmes is somebody who, at the very edge of the modern and contemporary age, is a very traditional figure. He keeps restoring the old order, and he doesn't want much for himself. He doesn't even, that's the weird thing about it. He enjoys the mystery. He enjoys his roommate. He enjoys his tobacco. He enjoys his occasional shot of cocaine in the arm, but he's not greedy. What he's really doing, he's a kind of saintly character who just wants England to be its best.
That's totally true, and he's in that sense he's the archetype of a lot of detectives, right? So Marlowe was another slumming angel who never charged more than the $20 a day or whatever it was,
right,
plus expenses, right? But Holmes clearly does what he does for the sheer love of the challenge,
sport of it.
The sport of it. There's nothing else that exists for him. Like even emotions, the love interests, they barely penetrate the exterior of this character, but they do just enough to make him realistic. That's the thing that's so cool about him. He's just such a perfectly rendered character, I think, in the end. And the friendship with Watson is what really makes it go. It's
why does he like Watson? What is it he likes about Watson? Is it just he doesn't want to be lonely in his eccentric intellect? Is it just that he keeps him company? There's something about Watson. And let's not go into all the ideas that, they have a gay relationship or whatever. there's something that keeps him with Watson.
So,
Causes him to insult him sometimes and then reel him back in.
well, so I mean, my theory about this, and is that Watson is so obviously like a stand-in for Conan Doyle, and there's even a moment in this book that I thought was a little bit of a slip, where he talks about Holmes's great interest in some kind of detection method, and then he says something like, "which I also shared," right? And forgetting that, like, artistically, like, these two characters need to be kind of significantly different. Um, but uh, but yeah, no, I think Holmes is the idealized character. Watson's the person that's much more like the writer,
And the reader.
and the reader. But the friendship is very genuine, and uh, it's kind of like an ultimate bromance.
It is.
They're really funny together. Like it's the only happy marriage in literature, like until Beavis and Butthead, I think. And but what's really funny about it is that they have genuine affection for each other. They never stop giving each other shit about things, and they're the only ones for each other too. Like, that's a thing that's kind of neat about the story. Like, while Watson does have a social life, Holmes is the person to whom he's devoted. And
Watson is Holmes' social life.
Right, yeah. Holmes has nothing else but Watson, and this story is unusual because they're separate for large portions of the story,
Yes.
which is unique too. So
there's a large portion of the story where Watson thinks he's the detective.
Right.
And Holmes lets him. Holmes encourages him to do that. He does it in a little encapsulated way in the very introduction, and then he does it in a big way over the course of the middle of the story. One last thing about Sherlock Holmes and why he's so appealing and such a tonic in this age. He really doesn't care about, how can I put it? He's a little vain in this story. He doesn't like the idea that he's the number 2 detective on the European continent, which someone suggests.
Yeah, he gets baited into doing the case by that. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. But even though he doesn't show it, you got the feeling that he's got the ultimate tender heart, because he never rejects a client. He never says, "Go away, I don't have time." He always has time for people. He's a little Christ-like in a very disguised way, because no matter what happens to you, if you appeal to Sherlock Holmes, he's going to help you. And he's going to use the equal amount of energy, deductive power, and so on your behalf. Sometimes it's just a little lady. He's not a classist. See, in a very class-bound society, Sherlock Holmes is not a snob.
That's true. He doesn't, as impressed as he can be by the size of someone's inheritance. He's also perfectly happy to spend time with.
He lives in a stone hut out on the moors for most of this story, and when we finally discovered that he's lived there, he's perfectly happy.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny, as I was reading this story, it happens to be a time when I've been reading some of the old Greek legends to my kids at night, right? So
cool.
You're reading about Perseus and Theseus and stuff like that. Yeah, heroes are an eternal thing. People need heroes, and Holmes. He arrived at a time when people were running out of heroes, right? And he was a new paradigm.
He's a little like the figure that we came to know as the American cowboy.
Right.
If you run to, he doesn't have much himself. He just has his horse. He likes, being free. And Holmes does like being free. Nobody can put any rules on Sherlock Holmes. He's going to do what he damn well wants to in that little room of his. But If you come to him, he will help you unto his death. Almost. He will risk his life if just some lady comes up off the street with an umbrella and says, I can't tell you what this bastard did.
Without a thought. It's not even a consideration for
No.
him. None of these things, and it's a beautiful quality, and the plots are very in this story. Um, I think this was a very clever plot. That there were a couple of slow parts. I think when during the sections with Watson's diaries and stuff like that, but for the most part, just incredibly satisfying. And you know, Americans have a tendency to be cynical about everything. And we've been through so many layers of irony, seeing so many commercials and everything that we've uh, sometimes we've lost the ability to remember that there are such things as heroes in life, right? And
Yep. Yep.
he is that in this book. It's still the fact that it still works in 2025 is a great thing. So I was very cheered reading this.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when we first started it, the first 2 days I was reading it, I was out at my cabin and it was kind of raining out. Dude, I didn't want to do anything else. No, I didn't want to answer the phone. I just wanted to live in that world, you know?
Right, right, and that's probably we were both like that as boys too.
Yeah,
So yeah, and if you have kids, uh, highly suggest that you get them to read these stories as soon as possible. So,
me too.
all right, well, that was fun, Walter. Thanks so much, and we'll see everybody next week.